Tonight we have Fred Merriam. He's going to talk about a book that he just put together called I'm going to mess this up. Chelmsford Revisited.
Images of America, Chelmsford Revisited.
Chelmsford, okay, Images of America, Chelmsford Revisited. Fred is, although he's not a native to Chelmsford, he did move here in 1971 to raise his family in a town that came highly recommended. His interest in local history started after reading historical newspaper stories written by Eleanor Parkhurst and her cousin George Parkhurst. Fred graduated from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy. He completed a 41-year career in electrical engineering. Fred has had a lifelong interest in photography. He was naturally attracted to all the beautiful images in the collection of the Chelmsford Historical Society. And he's pleased to have the opportunity to put together and research this book for public enjoyment. Fred has been, he's an appointed member of the Chelmsford Historical Commission since 2003. He's a board member of the Chelmsford Historical Society, and he manages the websites for both organizations. He published the book History of Chelmsford, 1910 to 1970, for the Historical Commission in 2011. And I think we have copies of that back there, correct?
Yes.
And he compiled the history of the Chelmsford Fire Department on the town's website in 2013 at the request of the fire department. We're not doing historical research. Fred does photographic projects for the town of Chelmsford and finds time to relax in York Beach. He hopes that his work will bring pleasure to the readers and recognition to the hardworking volunteers at the Chelmsford Historical Society. It is a gift in return for the published words of those who came before. A portion, actually tonight, any sales of Fred's book, that profit, that money goes back to the Chelmsford Historical Society. And I understand there's copies available at town offices and at Chelmsford Copy Center. And the Historical Society, probably?
During Historical Society events, there will be copies available.
At events at the Historical Society. So I think we are ready to get started, and I'm very happy to present Fred Merriam. Fred?
Well, I'm happy to be here. A little nervous, but very happy. And as you can see, it's about Chelmsford Revisited, but this is not what's in the book. This is the rest of the story, okay? So you're going to see photos either that haven't been published before, or you're going to see enlargements of photos that may be in one book or another to tell the story that we're going to tell here today. So we're going to follow the chapters in the book. There are 9 chapters in the book. The first one's about the photographers. And, okay, this one right here, you may have seen. This has been published before. I believe it was in the previous version of the book. Chelmsford Revisited, just for to keep things straight for you, I'm going to call the new book. The Images of America Chelmsford, I'm going to call the old book. That's the one that the Historic Society and the Garrison House did. The blue-covered book that was published 2 years ago, History of Chelmsford, 1910 to 1970, I'm going to call the history book. And George A. Parkhurst wrote a book in 1989 called Chelmsford, a Town and Its People, something like that. So I'm going to call that the George Parkhurst book. So I may make reference to those 4 fairly recent history books during the conversation, so I don't have to repeat the full title every time. New book, old book, history book, and George Parkhurst book. So anyway, this was published in the old book, and only a half of it, only one half was published. That was actually, this negative was actually produced as a separate image, and that image was published, but it's the same, from the same negative. No credit was ever given as to who the photographer was. So I was always curious because the photo was dated at 1860. There's some interesting facts about 1860. That was 1 year after the Revolutionary War monument was installed. on the Common. The Stamson Stoddard House is still there, of course. And this was the Chelmsford Classical School. I say was. At the time this photo was taken, and this particular photo was misidentified, it was Chelmsford Academy. Chelmsford Academy only ran from 1859 to 1862. And another thing that's unique, this is the only one of Chelmsford Academy I've seen. If you look at the bell tower, there's actually a bell in the tower. And that bell was later moved to the center school over where on the site where the center fire station is. And after that building, after that building was taken down, the bell was stored somewhere, and in 1975, when the Bicentennial Commission took possession of the 1802 schoolhouse, it went to the 1802 schoolhouse. So you see the cupola in the schoolhouse, and that same bell that you see in this picture, you can see the mechanism for ringing it. I can't quite, well, it's possible you can see the bell. That bell is in the cupola, and in the Historic Commission right now we're discussing the possibility of reactivating the bell so people can ring it again. We're going to check with Peggy Dunn, who lives nearby, make sure it's not an annoyance, because if kids are ringing the bell, that might drive her up the wall. So if she says okay, we may fix the bell and you'll be able to hear it again. It's the same bell that was in Chelmsford Classical School, followed by Chelmsford Academy, followed by Center School, and now in the 1802 schoolhouse. So anyway, the next slide is the back side. And this particular slide, notice it was property of G. Thomas Parkhurst. Okay, so who is G. Thomas Parkhurst? Well, he's this fellow right here on the cover of the new book with the bowler hat. And this particular slide, 1860, which was a little bit before his time, was in his personal collection. And it only came to us, you can see from the accession number, in year 2000. So we had some pictures at the Historic Society that were the same as this 1960 print on the front of Center Common. But we didn't really know who it was until we got this particular version, which has S. Toll on the back. So now that tells us at least who the photographer is. And he was based in Lowell. Now, we found out S. Toll is Simon Toll. And he came from a family of 12. He grew up in Buxton, Maine. And during the research for this book, he had a sister by the name of Nancy who married George Gilchrist, who actually had the studio in Lowell where Simon Toll worked. So George Gilchrist and Nancy had a daughter, and guess who she married? Anybody ever hear of George C. Moore? No, okay. Well, you will learn over the next few years as more information comes out, he was the father of North Chelmsford. He's the man that built all those large brick mills that you see. He was responsible for the growth of the town from maybe 200 people to several thousand people. I can't put it any plainer than that. He's the one that made it all happen. And that was the financial dynamo in the town of Chelmsford, even though Center had the administrative and it was farming. The economic powerhouse was actually in North Chelmsford. Now this book is not about North Chelmsford. I mention it only because Simon Toll is related to George C. Moore. He was the in-house photographer for George C. Moore while he was actually building and operating those mills. We have some spectacular pictures of, that you're going to see, not this year, but in possibly about 3 years. He had another sister named Melissa. Oops, wrong button. He had a sister named Melissa who married a fellow by the name of George Tyler, and their great-great-grandson happens to live in Pelham, New Hampshire. He happens to be a genealogy buff, and he happens to be the parts manager at the Toyota place in Nashua. He went on Ancestry.com. He did a whole family tree, and it was through him that we got the family tree for Simon Toll, and actually got this picture and the one that you see in the book. I didn't put that one up here because it's already in the new book. So there's a collection right here in this building of photos. It's been called the Royal Shawcross Collection, and there are some small copies on the library website. And these are the most amazing photos of North Chelmsford. This is just one right here. This is the George C. Moore storehouse. And we had no information at all who the photographer was. And it turns out, because of the fellow Bill Johnston, who was related, he was great-great-grandson of George C. Moore, who actually contacted me out of the blue on the Historic Society website. He had a collection of photos from the George C. Moore family collection, and they were different. Most of them were different, but we happen to have one that's the same. This is the one that's in the library right here. This is the one he had in the George C. Moore family collection. Identical. The only difference is photographer is identified on the back. So this is like the Rosetta Stone. Simon Toll. There's about 150 pictures. So not only was he the father, was George C. Moore the father of the Mills, his in-house photographer, Simon Toll, documented it. So far, there's no interpretation, and nobody knew until we started this project. So there's a lot of information now developing about North Chelmsford that's going to come out. So these are a couple of other items from the Moore family. This is actually a bag from the wool scouring mill and some wool. And this little boy here, we had no way to find out. That's George C. Moore, Jr. Now, who's this guy? I found this card in the Historic Society. We didn't have an accession, and the reason I know that, BBH is Barrett Byam House. It just has a number. Kind of a mystery card. So it's Fred Spalding. Okay, he's from Chelmsford. He's a portrait and landscape photographer in Chelmsford. Okay. What's wrong here? Any ideas? His address, 3 Tyndall Square, opposite the Corn Exchange. Okay. It turns out he is in Chelmsford, England. So I figured, okay, I'll go on the internet. He sounds like he had a photographic studio, and he was, so let's see what we can find. Well, it turns out he wasn't just a photographer. He was the definitive photographer, kind of like Simon Toll with the Mills. He was the main photographer in Chelmsford, England. It's really Chelmsford, Essex, UK, in today's parlance. He was also the mayor of Chelmsford. And when I started looking at this, does anybody know what happened in Chelmsford, England in 2012? I'll bet you don't. Well, now you're going to find out. In 2012, the town of Chelmsford had the great honor of being named by the Queen as a city. So Chelmsford, England is no longer a town. It's the city of Chelmsford, England. And as part of the celebration, they had 12 people chosen as heroes, local heroes. And guess who one of those local heroes was? Yeah, somebody's awake. This guy right here. Okay, now another one, just to give you an idea of the quality of these 12 people, another one was Guglielmo Marconi. Anybody hear of him? He's the guy that he built his first radio factories, and nobody knew that probably, that he first produced his commercial radios in Chelmsford. Another one was Queen Boudicca, who during the time of Christ actually stood up to the Roman army. She and 75,000 troops eventually got clobbered, but she's a legend in all of England. In fact, I see some nodding here. People have heard of her. So she's another one of the 12, along with Fred. So I was very surprised and very pleased to find out that Chelmsford had this great honor, and Fred Spalding is recognized. And there are collections, many collections, including they had a museum for the 12 heroes, and they set up many of his photographs as part of that exhibit. So, local hero in 2012. And he lived a little bit later than Simon Toll. Simon Toll actually died in 1910. Fred lived to 1947. His father was a photographer before him, and between the two, they covered the entire time span that Simon Toll covered. All the way up, you can see to World War II. So he was around in World War I also. All right, here's our unsung hero, Simon Toll. And my mission, starting tonight, is to introduce everybody to Simon, who he is, some of the photographs that he produced. For instance, I'll show you another one. Actually, it's in this book. It's in the new book, right here in the beginning. Okay, this photo was taken in 1905 at Town Hall. And it turns out that Simon was the official photographer for the 1905 celebration. Even though Arthur Emerson took pictures during the event, all the pictures that were in the book that was published on 1905 were done by Simon Toll. And we have prints. We don't have the negatives, but we have the prints of those at the Historic Society. And one of them is in the book. Actually, there are two. There's another one further down in the book. So introducing Simon Toll. So this fellow right here is Arthur Emerson, okay? Now the story is Willis Parkhurst, who lived at 78 High Street. And just so that you know who Willis is, he's this guy sitting on the ground right here. And he's also the guy that's taking this picture. And if you look over on the other side, you can actually see the pneumatic tube, and that operates the shutter. He's holding the bulb over here in his right hand. So he's taking this picture of Arthur Emerson, who's another of our photographers, and he's taking a picture of this cow. Now, his sister, Susie Emerson, was a teacher. A lot of people have heard Susie Emerson. She's the one that initiated the planting of the beech tree on the Common in 1891. She was a teacher, and her classes, the classes were all mixed together, the high school classes at the time. She initiated it. They went to Edwin H. Warren down on Boston Road, 77 Boston Road. He had a nursery out back, and they bought the beech tree stock and planted it on the Common. And of course, you've all seen the beech tree in its later stages of life and its recent disappearance. But Susie, in her memoirs in the 1930s, wrote that Arthur Emerson had made a camera from scratch. He built it with wood. He had a commercial lens, and she mentioned a bellows, although you can't see any bellows. So here's a closer view, and you can see here, looks like an ordinary drawer pull, and it looks like ordinary slabs of wood. And he's got a button here. It looks like he's holding a shutter button on top. And this is a light-tight plate. So he's removed the plate from the glass slide to allow it to be exposed. And now he's pushed the shutter. And, excuse me, searching as much as I can, I haven't found a picture of that cow yet that he took with that camera. So now everybody's heard of a selfie, right? No, some people haven't. Well, a selfie, just to demonstrate, that's when you take a camera or your cell phone and you line it up with your hand at a distance and take a picture of you and a whole room full of your new best friends. Okay? Oh, nice picture. So Arthur was an expert at the selfie. He did it. He didn't have the name for it, but I'll just go through these pretty quick here. This is Arthur and Emma Parkhurst. Oh, you say, who's Emma Parkhurst? Okay. Emma Parkhurst is right here behind G. Thomas Parkhurst. It looks like she has the top of a chair sticking out of her head, but it's really a chair. And that's Emma. And she was Arthur's lifelong girlfriend, from what I can tell, but they never married. Not sure why. There was a lot of that going around. Like Susie Emerson didn't marry because she was a teacher, and at that time they weren't allowed to marry, or you lose your job. Now Emma she worked at Parkhurst's store down on the Common on 2 Chelmsford Street. I can't figure out a reason why they didn't get married. Arthur was about 10 years older. So here's a selfie. They're reading Illustrated American magazine. Here's a selfie. Arthur's fishing. He was a sportsman. He liked to hunt and fish. Here's a selfie. They're playing backgammon. Here's a selfie. They went out for a ride. And up here, up here, you can see the carriage. Very nice carriage that they rode out to this scenic spot and set up the camera. I wonder if Emma was a little bit annoyed in all the time it took for Arthur to... It wasn't like you could pull a cell phone out of your pocket. You know, this was a major setup job to take this selfie. This one is a family picnic, and this is Willis, the photographer, and his sister Bertha, who's also on the cover of the new book. And That's Emma and Arthur. And they liked Moxie at that time. And so they had a lot of good picnics, a lot of good times. This is my favorite shot. This is, I think this is Willis over here and Bertha, and that's Emma and Arthur on the boat. Would you risk a camera like this in a rowboat? That's question number one. Question two is, could you hold the rowboat still enough for the long exposures you needed for glass slides? So, unanswered questions. Now we'll move on to Central Square. Okay, this was a 8x10 glass negative. When I pulled this out of the attic at the Historic Society, it was in an uncontrolled, very hot, very cold attic in a dusty old bureau. Pulled this out with a large batch, I don't know, maybe 40, 50 pounds of glass slides. This one had never been seen, never been published. So I held it up to the window and thought, oh, okay, this looks like another farmhouse out in the country somewhere. So then I scanned it. We have a scanner that can actually scan 8x10 negatives, glass negatives. And if you look up here, this is the Unitarian Church, and this is the town clock reading 5 minutes of 3, plain as day. And this windmill over here matches pictures we have of the windmill in back of Central House. So oh my God, that house is in Central Square. So where is it? Here's another view. This is Central House right here. And this is actually my favorite picture of Central Square. This is just a small cropped portion out of the picture that's in your book. This is the Fairbanks hay scale. This is that building again, same building we just saw. It's actually the Proctor wheelwright shop. It was built in around 1812 by Jonas Proctor. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it because it's an interesting building and you probably never guess how it's set up. But this old sign is kind of neat. These were towns that were important at the time. Lancaster was important, Worcester. And this is the building that Jack Steiner came into in later years. But there were several people that were appointed in town as weighers of hay. And they were usually businessmen right handy to the center to make sure that the hay was measured properly and accurately. This is another view. Okay, this is the Proctor wheelwright shop again. They added a house sometime before 1925. They added a house on the end of it. Now that should look familiar to you, okay? Now this is Cushing Place, but what's not familiar is the building at the end. A lot of history books have the Cushing Mill shown. There were a lot of pictures during parades because Cushing used to have their wagons in the parades. Dan Haley and so on would get their wagons ready there. This is the mill counting house that's still there today. It's a bridal shop now. But this tells you exactly where the Cushing warehouse, this is actually not a mill but a warehouse. The mill was over here in back on the left side. This tells you where it was. It was straight down Cushing Road. I've never seen until I saw this picture exactly where in the back of Jack Handley's empire that was. Now this building right here was built as a storehouse, and it was built with timbers from the old mill that was dismantled over here. That building is still there. Jack Handley used that to store merchandise. Here it is today. This is the wheelwright shop right here, the front of it. It's got a bump out for businesses to expand the space inside a little. And then further down you have the card and gift shop. These are all Jack's buildings until you get up here, and that's the one that used to be Jack Steiner, right up here. And then looking the other direction, you've got the Easy Housekeeping shop. And down here is that house that was added before 1925. You can see the gable here that's clearly shown in the glass negative. And there's the mill counting house. Now, one thing I wanted you to notice, see the two lines on the pavement in front? Anybody guess what that is? A wild guess?
Bridge for the stream.
Yes, who said that? Yes. This building, which you saw was originally all by itself, was built directly over Beaver Brook. Beaver Brook went directly underneath the center of it. Why? Because in 1812, and maybe all the way up through 1880 or so, they actually used the stream for power. They had a water wheel underneath the building, and the wheelwright had things that he had to turn. He had lathes to make spokes and so on. So this was actually a water-powered shop in the original days. And of course, this is a bridge now. So when you're walking over the sidewalk, you're actually walking over Beaver Brook. And I have seen pictures when the town was actually doing repairs on this many years ago, before my time. But it's still there, and there's still moisture coming up under the building. In fact, I saw Jack Hanley this week, and he was having some work done on around the baseboards here because of some of the moisture taking a toll. All right, now you talk about moisture. This is back in 1979. Okay, here's the wheelwright shop. Here's that house that's now known as Center Flower Shop in January 1979. Here's the bridal shop that was the mill count. That was actually Ruby Emery's bakery at the time this picture was taken. So I thought maybe the stream backed up going under the shop over here. And I saw Jack Hanley just a couple of weeks ago, and he told me the rest of the story. Okay, so what happened was there was a really heavy rain, and a door floated down Beaver Brook, and the door caught. There's a bridge over Cushing Lane, and I'm not going to show you because there's a great picture in the new book of the bridge. It had a round arch over Cushing Lane. When they had just finished that bridge, it's in there. That door landed right across the arch. Okay, it backed the water up. It had to find some way to get to the other side of Central Square. So here it goes. And these are some town officials trying to figure out what to do. And then looking the other direction, okay, this is Center Medical Center, and this is Lee's Yarn and Hobby Variety over here. This is Marcus and Leslie's Antidote right now. They wouldn't be too happy if this happened today. And this, of course, is Fishbone's restaurant over here. So this is what it looks like today. There's Antidote, and there's Fishbones. So you can just imagine what kind of a disaster it would be if that happened today. This is the Oddfellows Hall, and this is relevant today. If anybody checked the paper today, there's a Center Village Master Plan, and part of that plan is to take down this addition that was put on right here. That was put on as a 20 by 30 addition well after the building was originally built. It was built as a barber shop. Then when it became a bank, the bank presidents had their desks in here. It was Mr. Redstone first, and then George Duncan had his desk in there. That was their office. So right now, it doesn't have much of a function. So part of the master plan is to tear that off the building, bring it back to its original shape, and have a river walk all the way down into the back of the parking lots. If you haven't seen that plan, it's spectacular. You're going to be able to connect all the parking lots. It's going to be bike trails, signage. It's beautiful. Now this is Jack Hanley's, all of his stores. He owns everything here in the picture, except maybe the cars. This right here is the new bridge. Okay, in the book there's a picture of the old bridge that was a small arch, maybe about half the size of this, like this. So now they built a bridge after that '79 fiasco that they think even a door can't block. So that's what it looks like today. Now here's a picture. Everybody knows what it is. It's Town Hall. If you have a copy of the history book, okay, you know it's the back side of the cover, the jacket. That's the same picture. And the reason it's here, I had heard some stories. This is the flagman's shack. I had heard some stories about a flagman by the name of Philip Donahoe. So I was always curious, who is Philip Donahoe? What does he look like? When did he live? So I went on a mission, and I didn't really have any good information until David Brow. Anybody hear of David Brow? He's a photographer for the Lowell Sun. He had, in his house, he had some negatives stashed away down in the dark recesses that had never been seen, that were taken in Chelmsford Center around 1925. So now I've got some pictures, and here's one of them. And if you look right here is the flagman's shack, but it's on the other side of the tracks. They moved it on the opposite side from the town hall. And there's an interesting character over here. If you look, there's a whole bunch of people all lined up along the side of the street holding kids and so on. They're all watching the parade. Well, this guy's not. He's leaning against the flagman's shack. Aha! So we're going to zoom in here. Okay, look. If you see this guy here, here's a man. He's wearing a trench coat. Looks like he's holding a pipe, puffing some smoke, and he's got a fedora hat on. Could that be Philip Donahoe? Don't know. He could just be a bystander taking a smoke. Okay, here's another picture. And this one was taken from the Unitarian Church, maybe the front steps. I have to mention, this is Officer Donald Adams. And if anybody doesn't know what happened to Donald Adams, this is 1925. In 1927, okay, if anybody wants to read, there's a detailed account in the history book that was written. Actually, it was in the papers right after it happened. So I won't go over that story because it's in the book. But here's the shack again, and here's the Chelmsford garage. And it's kind of hard to see what's going on here, so let's zoom in. Aha. What you see now, this is the door of the firehouse. In 1921, they bought a big fire engine. They didn't have a place to put it other than in back of the town hall. So the fellows that built Kidder's garage here built one end of it. It's still there. The tall end of the building had a large door just to house that American LaFrance engine from 1922 until 1926 or 7 or so. So anyway, here's a guy that's sitting in a chair. That's kind of the pose you'd expect for a flagman, you know, just waiting for the scheduled train to come through. And he kind of has a hat, I think they call it a poor boy hat. He kind of looks like the guy that you're going to see in the new book. There's a picture of him up close and personal. So in the book, I didn't know who he was, but I said he could be, because based on this picture right here, I said he could be Philip Donahoe. But then, as I was enlarging this picture, I discovered something that changed everything. Whoops, excuse me. If you go over here, right here, it's hard, it's easier for me to see on the computer, but in fact, I can't see it at all. There's an arm pointed downward, and there's an arm upward holding a pipe, and there's a fedora hat. Aha! So I didn't see it until I really zoomed in, and I started to diddle with the exposure and pulled out from the darkness. So that kind of matched the guy who was in the other picture, okay? So now I can confidently present to you for the first time on a scratchy old negative that came out of David Brow's house in Dunstable that's never been seen on Earth by anybody but me. Okay, now you. I give you Philip Donahoe. Okay, there he is with his pipe and his fedora hat. It might be a whistle hanging from his string here. This is the coal bin that he uses to shovel coal into the potbelly stove in the shack. And this building right here, this was used by industry during the time that Philip was there. But later it was purchased by a fellow by the name of George Kalos. And he turned it into the Center Mall. I think he had a business partner, maybe Howard Hall originally. So this became the Center Mall. Anybody know what happened to Center Mall in 1989? It burned almost to the ground. In fact, it was such a bad loss that the fire chief at the time recommended that it be torn down. Well, George Kalos said no. He said, I really like the history and the building, my little corner of Chelmsford Square. I'm going to save it. So he went, and it was 89 it burned. In 1991 he opened it again, and it was very different. If you see, there were large blocks of glass windows that used to light the factories that were inside, factory building. Now he's got stores accessed from the outside. He took the corridors that were inside and made those part of the space for the businesses. So this, which is all glass, there are now 6 individual businesses. I'm going to tell you a secret about George Kalos. Does anybody know him personally or heard of him?
My neighbor.
Is your neighbor? Okay. Well, you're going to love this then. Secret about George Kalos, the real estate developer. I knew him as George Kalogeropoulos, the software engineer, back in the 1970s, would you believe? And here, of course, is what happened to the railroad track. This is the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, right next to the parking lot at George's building. Okay, now we'll move on to a chapter on the Center Mill Pond. Anybody not realize that there was a mill pond in Chelmsford Center? Nobody's bold enough to say that you didn't know? Okay. All right, there's probably a couple people that didn't. This is the pond, okay, but everybody loves a train wreck. So there are 2 views, there are 2 great views in the book. This is the 3rd view from the other angle. There's one from across the pond, there's one from up the tracks, and this is the one looking at the underside of the engine. I just had to show it to you. It's just too juicy not to show. Okay. Now we're looking across the pond, and we're looking at the, what was originally the Chelmsford Mill Company saw and grist mill. I'm pushing the wrong button, apologize. This is the laser. This is the mill building here. This is that wheelwright house, the Charles Proctor wheelwright house again. There was one gable on the backside, and the brook, after it runs through the mills and comes out, goes right underneath the middle of that building, and it did, as it did then, it still does today. But this building had several owners, but in the 1860s, 70s, and 80s, the proprietors of that mill were very interesting characters. So we had Benjamin M. Fisk. He owned the house at the 1 Billerica Road, we all know as the Fisk House. Edwin K. Parkhurst. He owned Parkhurst Store, which is now on 2 Chelmsford Street. He owned it when it was on the site where the town hall is today. So he owned it before the railroad came through. And it got moved to 2 Chelmsford Street. And his cousin, S. Waldo Parkhurst, who's that? This gentleman right here. He ran the store after it was moved over to Chelmsford Street. And his family, Bertha and Emma, and in fact Arthur Emerson, all worked there as clerks and accountants and so on. So it was a family business. So Edwin K. Parkhurst gave up the store, but he was one of the partners in the Chelmsford Mills. Anybody hear of Deacon David Perham? No, he was another partner in the mills. Deacon David was the guy that built, at his own expense, the Central Baptist Church, and then sold it to the deacons of the church. He was a deacon himself. He sold it to the church at about half of what it cost him to build. And that was built on the Samson Stoddard house that we saw in the very first picture. It was built on that site. He actually bought that house and tore it down. Historic Commission wouldn't have let him tear it down today. We would have given him a rough time. He would have had a 1-year delay, but back then it wasn't an issue. So he was the 3rd partner, and the last partner was Dr. Levi Howard. Now, you know, at 21 Chelmsford Street, Dr. Mike Sargent has a beautiful building with columns in the front, and he has a dental practice there. And he recently bought the building across the street at number 20, and he's got that colored the same, and he's leased that out to some other businesses. Well, Dr. Levi Howard owned that house at the time of the mills, and he was another one of the partners. He was one of the well-known doctors in town. And his son, Dr. Amasa Howard, or Amasa, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, he took over the practice at the same location after Dr. Howard. So those are the 4 men. Now, they all had day jobs. Of course, Dr. Howard was a doctor. E.K. Parkhurst, he ran the store, but after the railroad moved the store and his cousin took it over, he started to work for the railroad. He became the station agent for the Framingham and Lowell Railroad. So he had a regular day job. And of course, Deacon David Perham, in addition to being the person that built the church, that was just a side project. That was his contribution. He ran the cider mill over on Westford Street that's no longer there. Everybody's heard of the Perham cider mill. Deacon David was the one that actually started it in 1940. Did I say 1940? You know what I meant, 1840. This is these are the ice houses that long gone. You know what happened to ice houses? Refrigerators came along in the 1930s and there was no more need for ice houses. But I do have to tell you about one screw up I made. In the book, I said that the sawdust, when we get to the sawmills chapter, was used mostly for bedding for cows, because that's what my grandparents used for bedding for cows. So I assumed, then I'm looking at the ice houses, and then I remembered, oh, you dummy. The same people that had the sawmills had ice houses. Why? Because you need the sawdust to store the ice, okay? So I will retract what I said in the book and say it may have been for cows, but it was mostly for the ice houses. And it's very good insulating. The ice would actually last through the whole summer. As they'd unpack it, they'd just brush the sawdust aside, and it kept very well. So the icemen could carry it out. Now they had ramps, and the ramps would go up. You see, they had a door that they could remove all the way up. So as the ice it kept getting higher and higher inside, they could keep moving doors up and up and up, so they could load it right up to the top, because more ice is more money. Now we're on the other side of Central Square. We're looking from Central Square Bridge, where Beaver Brook comes out on the other side. And this is the This is the blacksmith shop, which was torn down in 1923. It still served as a blacksmith shop until then. It was a very necessary function. Now there's a lot of pictures of the blacksmith shop, so I'm not going to show you any here. There's a reason for this particular picture. Everybody likes Barnum and Bailey Circus, right? Well, this was a famous spot. Everybody plastered posters. Those happened to be Barnum and Bailey show advertisements. This is the back end of the Oddfellows Hall here. This is Beaver Brook, and it looks like there's a door open and somebody's been throwing a little ash out into the brook. That wouldn't make him too popular today. This is looking the other direction. This is the back corner of the blacksmith shop. This is water grass, so the brook is still fairly clean. And you can actually see the arch and the bridge, and you can see under the bridge, and you can see daylight on the other side. This is an enlargement. It's the last picture in the Mill Pond chapter. The reason I showed it in the print that's in the book, you can't see this bridge. It's too dark. It's just black. So I enlarged it and increased the exposure. And there's the bridge. Now, if you look at this little clump of rocks right here, and look at the next picture, there's the bridge today. And I think this clump of rocks is the same clump from 120 years ago in the other picture, okay? So when they redid this bridge, you can see obviously they redid it, and there is a date on the bridge, and I forget what it was, but I think they used the same rocks that were in that original bridge. Now, this is relevant again to today, because this is that nasty addition. See how it hangs right out over the brook? When they rip that out, this is going to be one heck of a nice river walk. Because right now you can see where the Marcus and Leslie building is, there is no room to walk on that side. Okay, now we're going to move to Center Common. This picture was, there's a nice story about Governor Greenhalgh, which is in the book. But the reason I made this picture redundant to the book is because in the book it says that this picture was taken by the Revolutionary War Monument, okay? And you can plainly see the Revolutionary War Monument in this picture, right? Well, guess what my friends at Arcadia did? They photoshopped that out of the picture. And I had a low-resolution review copy, and I didn't catch it. So I apologize for Arcadia. They didn't know what they were doing. So I wanted just to show you, okay, if anybody asks you that Fred is a dummy, he said there's a monument, and there's not, well, it was there, and you've seen it, okay? Now, this is nobody has seen this unless you're around in 1949 and got the paper. This is from the Historic Commission Archives, I think. This is the back of 11 North Road. And everybody knows that Ted Emerson owned it, then the town bought it about 1974. But Ted Emerson had a couple of kids, Jim and Brad. And Jim was going to live, this is an addition, this is they called it an L, but it was another wing on the back of 11 North Road. So Jim and Brad were busy digging underneath for a foundation so they could have a basement and do a proper foundation. I guess it was just sitting on the ground. And this was going to be Jim's house for he and his family. Well, they had a little, something slipped, okay? Everybody got out of the way, but here's the picture. This is what happened to that house. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about James P. Emerson, who was Ted Emerson's grandfather. Because J.P. Emerson, there's a whole line of auctioneers, but the other thing they did was move houses. So nothing goes to waste. So what are they going to do with this wing? Move it to Fletcher Street. So if you look at, they took the top half of this building and they moved it over to Fletcher Street. And if you look at this section of building right here, that's the top half of that wing, okay? Now, this was Dr. Martin Gruber's Chelmsford Animal Hospital. Most people have pets, have been there one time or another. But so they added out this way, they put a lean-to on, and they added out this way. And I always wondered, it looks sort of like a weird building. Who would design a building like that? So unless you know where it came from, okay, now you can appreciate the shape. But you can't appreciate it anymore because Dr. Gruber died. And a fellow by the name of Fred Ramsayer bought it, and he tore it down and built this lovely facility here. And it's also called Chelmsford Animal Hospital. He happens to be my neighbor across the street, so feel free to go to his place. Yeah. That's when they first built it. It's all landscaped. It's beautiful now. And this facility on top here, generally if you have dogs and animals overnight, you need some overnight protection. That's an apartment for the live-in help. So they've got a nice deck on the back. It's living quarters. Now this, we talked about Ted Emerson. Well, there was a catastrophe, a hired hand, a lantern. They're not sure exactly how it started, but I'm pretty sure it was a hired hand that started it. 1951, it was a disastrous fire. So I have to ask, has anybody visited the history of the Chelmsford Fire Department on the town website? Not one person, okay. All right, so I would suggest if you enjoy history, as you wouldn't be here if you didn't, I guess, if you go to the town website, go to the fire department, go right at the top, it says History of the Chelmsford Fire Department. This picture happens to be in there, but the rest of the pictures I'm going to show you are not. And the rest of the pictures that are on the fire department website are not in the new book either. There were enough pictures in the fire department archives that there's no duplication, other than I wanted to show you this one because it was a very dramatic overview of the fire. There were 49 cows and 1 horse that perished. I saw the picture with cows in it, and you're not going to see it. These are some of the firefighters from East Chelmsford fighting the fire. They came in from all the fire departments, all the districts, I should say, to fight this fire, and they did get it out. They did save the house at 11 North Road, which is the one we just saw with the collapsed L in the back. And the town hall was in jeopardy. There were a lot of things, churches. Congregational church was across the street. So that's all I'm going to show you about the fire because there are some great pictures in both this book and on the History of the Fire Department site. Now we're going to look at the Center Fire Station, and that's a relevant topic today, of course. So this is when they were building it. These are non-duplicates of anything else that you're going to see. This is when they had just put in the dispatch window and the door. And now we're in 1953. They're paving the apron in front. And this is the inside. And you can see each bay has a lot of lights. Presumably they could drive the ladder truck always went in the middle. Drive the ladder truck under. You could see it well with these lights. Well, That was fine when you had ladder trucks. The original ones before this 1962 Maxim were just trucks with ladder racks, kind of like a pickup truck with a ladder rack. So they had to take the ladders off and set them up on the buildings. That was not a problem driving in the 1952 building. This truck here fit also. As you can see at the top there, there's still clearance room. Now we have a 1985 Perch ladder truck. When they bought this, they thought they had enough room to fit it in the station. There was an emergency. They had the truck. They could not fit it in the station. The truck had to sit somewhere. I didn't catch exactly where it sat. They had to do a serious modification to that door. And you can't, I can see it. You might not see it because it's a pretty good disguise. The top section of the whole top section of that door looks like building, but it actually lifts up with the door in order to get that truck to fit. And then it went home. Then in 1999, we bought the Central States Quint. And the Quint is actually it's a pumper and a ladder truck. And you tell me, you can't even fit a fist between the top of that truck. I don't know how they do it. There's only one episode, they told me, there was only one time when somebody had left something on top and it caused some damage. Now, just to show you the door and what they had to do, this top section of the door right here actually looks like building. This whole section right here, they actually cut the ceiling away and raised the floor above in order to get the door completely up and out of the way. So this truck just barely fits in the existing ceiling height. Of course, they removed those fluorescent lights that were obviously in the way. So what happens next, they periodically have to replace these vehicles. And this is a combination pumper and ladder, so every time an engine has to go out of station one, that ladder has to go up because it's the pumper. That's a lot of extra wear and tear. So this Quint is almost ready for replacement. It's coming up very soon. To get a replacement, okay, if you look at this thing looks like it went through a car compactor. It's squashed right down. The driver is down almost to the middle of the tire here. It looks like, and literally it was designed specifically at much higher cost to fit into this roof. So the next time you buy, they're going to get a separate ladder and a separate pumper. And they're going to get a normal ladder. Okay, it's a lot less expensive and a lot more practical, and they're going to get plenty of overhead to install it. Okay, so where are they going to put it? Okay, this is from the photo log this Tuesday. And you can see from this truck right here, there's plenty of overhead. I'm not sure which of the bays are going to put the new ladder truck in, but there's plenty of overhead, and you can bet that door is going to be nice and high. So this is coming along very well. As I say, this is Tuesday, so you're almost up to the minute. They put the flag up, so the steel frame is all there. And actually, the steel roof is there, so they've got some drier conditions to work underneath. Are there any questions on the fire station since we're switching topics here?
Isn't there kind of a discussion at the time about why don't you just buy a truck that fits into the station instead of,
Oh, you mean into the old station?
Yeah, wasn't that kind of a local type
my
thing?
understanding is it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars extra
Oh,
you saw that design, how squashed down it is.
right.
It makes it hard to maintain. They don't have the capacity to store as much equipment, the storage cabinets and so on. You don't have the space. You can't climb up on top of it while it's inside to work on it. I could go on and on and on, and I don't even work for the fire department.
Well, no, I would agree that they got their money's worth out of that building, but
They did.
for less.
And the building actually, they not only got their money out of it, it's beyond its expiration date.
Yeah, that's,
If you go to the website, the fire department website, there's some pictures, and Chief Parrow, there's a picture of Chief Parrow down underneath with all the wooden blocks of wood that are holding the thing up, because the floor is literally falling apart and falling down. So, and there's no way to save it. It's too small. Yeah. Okay, so back here, sorry. This building is in the book. This picture is in the book explaining this building. Albert Davis, he was a town character, and his sister owned the house at 1 to 3 North Road, which is right next door to Town Hall. He built this workshop and back. His father died. He lived over on Davis Road. They had a family farm called Boulder Farm. He moved his family from here to Boulder Farm. So what did he do with his workshop? He sold it to James P. Emerson. And what did James P. Emerson do with it? He moved it to Fletcher Street. All right. So this actually is the inside of the front of the history book, right here. Same picture, okay? So you recognize the top of Town Hall here, and that was the original fire whistle that was on it. It was actually too loud. And there's some buildings that were identified in the town history book. And the reason was I didn't know what this building was, and I didn't know what this building was until doing the research for this book here. So now you can see where that workshop went. If you look at this building, there are 3 windows on the top and 4 windows on the bottom. And James took a barber shop that was somewhere over here on Chelmsford Street, maybe down here, not sure where, and he attached it to this building, and that is the workshop after it was moved. So then what happened? Then Albert Davis decided to move back again to 1 to 3 North Road with his sister. And he had to build another workshop because he already sold the other one to James P. Emerson. Okay, so here, I'm not sure if that's Albert, but somebody is building the first floor of the workshop. And that's Center School over and back here. And this is, as you can see, this is 1923. So all the additions had been built on Center School, and Center School was coming to the end of its life. So there's another shot. These shots, by the way, David Brow, I have to explain where these came from. David Brow grew up in that house. So after Davises moved out of the house, actually he was related to the Davises, I think. So his grandfather, not David, David's grandfather took these pictures. He had rolled up the negatives. I think they were the rejects because they were all scratched up and not well taken care of. Happily, they were saved and not thrown away because this picture right here is a gem. This is the barn right here. This is James P. Emerson's barn. It's the barn that burned. You can see it had it still had a windmill on it, even though in 1923 they didn't need the windmill. You know why? The town water came in 1913. So windmills had maintenance associated with them, so people generally took them down, although for nostalgia you could keep it up, or if you wanted to pump water for your animals, which is what they may have done here. Now here's another here's another building over here. This is a barn. And this barn is almost exact location where Phil Eliopoulos' house is at 9 North Road right now. And I just happen to know exactly what this building is. The fellow that owned the farm before James P. Emerson was named Hildreth Dutton. And Hildreth Dutton was a butcher. And this building right here was his slaughterhouse. So before 9 North Road,
barn-like structure.
yeah, it's a barn, but it is very old. Now, Hildreth Dutton, it does kind of look like a barn. They all look the same from the outside. But anyway, Hildreth owned the house from 1840 to 1860. So this is way before James P. Emerson's time. But the barn is still there, okay? Now we're getting up, James Emerson is still alive here. And it went right from James to his grandson, Ted. So who was Hildreth P. Dutton? And gee, was he related to Paul Dutton, who owned the house right next door? Anybody have any? No. I'm not even going to ask because nobody's going to have a clue. Because Hildreth Dutton had a daughter, and I can show you his daughter right now. That is Hildreth P. Dutton's daughter right there. Martha Parkhurst, Martha Dutton Parkhurst. So she was S. Waldo Parkhurst's wife. Now, we're still not connected to Paul Dutton, and I will get you there in a couple of minutes. And it's a surprising relationship, but it was fun. This is the second Davis workshop, and that's what it looks like today. It was made into at least 2 apartments. I see 3 meters, but I only see 2 doors. So assume it's very well kept, and it's right next door to Town Hall, in case anybody doesn't know where it is. Okay, now we're going to go to the Sawmill chapter. And because Arthur Warren is the only person that you could research that really was known to be an owner of sawmills, I've concentrated on Arthur and his family. So this is Arthur right here. When he was a younger man, he's got a bull rake he's holding up. And these are the hay wagons. Now, when I was a kid, I used to be the guy on top of the wagon stacking the hay. My grandfather had 2 tractors, Ford tractors. So somebody would drive the tractor, and as a kid, I would be up on top. So there was a brother of Arthur Warren. His name was Joseph E. Warren. And anybody hear of Joseph Warren House or Joseph Warren? There were 200 years of Joseph Warrens that lived on Boston Road. There's a big brown house. I'll show you that in a couple of minutes. Joseph Warren was the last of the Joseph Warrens. He actually fell off of one of these wagons. It might be one of these same 2 wagons. He fell off the wagon. He cracked his skull. He had to have a metal plate installed in his skull. He lived to a good long life, but he had serious headaches all his life. So even though he had inherited the big house down on Boston Road, Arthur Warren, his brother, ended up taking it over to manage it because Joseph couldn't handle it. Okay, this is that house right here. This is the Joseph Warren house. Now you must recognize this, anybody that drives down Route 4. That might be a different paint job, but it's the same house. Here's another of Arthur Emerson's selfies, but this time we've got Arthur Warren and his wife Mabel Warren. Now, I show it to you, there's another selfie with the 4 of them on a beach in a different pose, but a different location. Mabel Warren was originally an Emerson, so she was a relative of Arthur Emerson's, and her middle initial, she was Mabel P. Emerson. Well, guess what the P stands for? Yeah, you got it, Parkhurst. So her name was Mabel Parkhurst Emerson Warren. And this photo right here, I'm going to just tell you the big picture first. Company F, unattached cavalry, right after the Civil War in 1864, it was authorized that militias be formed to protect in case some Confederate sympathizers came down from Canada. Now, I'm going to significantly run over in time. Is that going to be a problem for anybody?
Yeah, we do need to finish up
What
at
time?
8:45 at the latest.
8:45 at the latest. Okay. I'm going to start talking faster. All right. This photo right here has a lot of interesting connections. Troop F. Whoops. This is Charles E. Bartlett. This is Arthur Warren, and this is Irvin Sweetser. Remember we talked about Dr. Levi Howard, her son, Dr. Amasa Howard? This is Amasa Howard's wife, and she happened to be a sister of Arthur Warren. And this is Martha Warren. She happens to be another sister of Arthur Warren. This lady right here is Mary Fenderson. Mary Fenderson is in the first page of the People chapter. She was the mother of Mabel Fenderson, who married Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was the grandfather of Brad Emerson. Now, this is a weird story. I'll make it quick. I was just figuring out how to talk about Mary Fenderson and her relationship to the Emerson family, getting down to Ralph Waldo Emerson, and his son was Ted Emerson, and Brad Emerson. The phone rings, and you never guess in a million years who it was. It was Brad Emerson. A million years goes fast. So this is Mabel again. This lady right here is Ida Jeffs. Her daughter, Millie Mae, married a fellow by the name of Winthrop A. Parkhurst. They had a little boy by the name of George A. Parkhurst. He's the guy that wrote the other book that we were talking about. So Bessie Sweetser is the last lady here, and this is Urban Sweetser. We're going to have a couple of historical society connections here. Bessie Sweetser was Urban's first wife. She died in 1926. He remarried a lady by the name of Octavia. She was 14 years younger. She lived a good long life until she was, until 1964. She passed away. In her will, she left her house. Now, Urban Sweetser and Bessie, and then Urban and Octavia lived at the house at 20 Chelmsford Street. You know where that is? Right across the street from Dr. Sargent's place, which is 21. So this is the building across the street, which Dr. Sargent also now owns and painted the same color. So Octavia, in her will, willed her house, that house at 20 Chelmsford Street, to the Chelmsford Historical Society. Historical Society declined. So the Garrison House, who had already picked up the Garrison House and Garrison Road after the Historical Society declined that house from Warren Leyhew, they picked up the house at 21 Chelmsford Street. Now they sold it after a couple of years, and you'd never guess in a million years who they sold it to. Brad Emerson. Okay, so you're going way back to 1965, and Brad Emerson called me today. How many years is that? For 50 years. So that was the kind of historical society connection there. And this gentleman over here, Charles Bartlett, was the first president of the Historical Society. This is the Warren family. Couple of sad notes. These are the 5 kids. This is Arthur and this is Mabel in later years. Julia and Carlton went with Arthur and his wife to Pasadena, California, because Arthur, you saw him in the first picture with hay. He developed a serious allergy to hay. His doctor recommended he go to a different climate. So it was around 1925 he took the family and moved to Pasadena. And in 1931, he was hit by a car and died. So the family moved back, and Julia here married a fellow by the name of Donald Fogg. He went to war in World War II. He was killed in North Africa. His war memorabilia is in the museum at the Historical Society. She lived 56 years as a widow, and we in the Historical Society thank her because she's the one that organized, during most of that time, she's the one that organized the accessions, the pictures. Her name is on probably 90% of the records that were so well kept. Amazing typist. So we thank Julia for that. And this gentleman right here, the connection to the Historical Society, Edwin, he's the grandfather of Becky Warren, who is the president of the Historical Society. This is Arthur Warren's house on Boston Road. If you've ever driven by that, I think it's 86. Now we're into Acton Road and High Street. Okay, 78 High Street. The carriage house is still there, the cupola is there, but no windmill. This windmill right here, you can clearly see, was an air motor, AER motor. I called, I went on the internet first. The company is still alive and still very, very productive. They'll sell you parts to repair anything after 1888, which is when they started business. They'll sell you a brand new windmill. It looks just like this. And you could, if they still had this, you could still get parts for it. But something happened to this windmill. It didn't last long. I don't know why, but I can show you that in the next picture, they have a Samson windmill. This is a company in Lowell. And this building is now festooned with lightning arresters. So I'm guessing that, that the old air motor bit the dust with a lightning strike. So I talked to John Crawford III. He was very helpful and had some pictures of the house on High Street. Eleanor Parkhurst used to own this house. So some of her archives went to the Crawfords. They were good friends. They actually rented from Eleanor before she passed away in 2000. He told me that there were still remnants. In fact, most of the mechanism for the windmill inside the building was still there. I said, can I see it? He said, sure, come on over. So we went inside. This right here is the cistern that the water was stored. It was for the horses. It wasn't for the house. It's a little hard to see, but there's a cable that goes up here. There's a pulley, another pulley. A cable goes down to the first floor. That was a gauge, water gauge, level gauge. So as the float went up, the gauge down below went down. This is a lever right here. The cable goes up. When you pull it, it pulls the sail over so that it's in line with the sail. It locks the sail from turning, so the thing isn't going clunketa all night while you're sleeping. And you don't want to overfill the tank either. And then there's another cable that goes down to the first floor, so you don't have to go up to pull it. And then there's a chain here and a counterweight here to pull this thing back up when you release it. Then going downstairs, here is, this is called a sucker rod. It's about a 5/8 inch wooden strip that goes all the way from the top. The gearbox converts rotary motion of the wheel to up and down motion of this sucker rod, which runs a pump all the way down in the basement, down into the ground. And they still make them exactly the same way. The design was so amazing, so practical, that it's still in use many places, many parts of the world today. This thing over here, this thing over here is the gauge. Right now the indicator is at the bottom. Normally if the tank was empty it would be at the top, but things aren't working exactly the way they used to. So you pull this ring to shut it off, and the horse barn is still there. The stables are still there. They're not usable. They're like everybody's garage that gets filled with stuff, but this is to protect the sucker rod from the horses. Okay, now Edwin K. Parkhurst, remember he was Chelmsford Mill partner? Well, and he ran the Parkhurst store, and he also became the station agent for the railroad, the Lowell and Framingham Railroad. So on the side, he decided to do a little land developing, because here he is, the station agent. Everybody has to go through him to buy tickets, ship freight. Hey, you want to buy some land? So he had this survey drawn up here, 1875, 5 lots, directly across the street from, well, I should say this house that you see on the cover of the book was built on lot number 5 right here. It's across the street from the elder Parkhurst, Solomon Parkhurst house. And just to get oriented, this is a street called Road to Robbins Hill. They didn't start calling it High Street yet. This is Acton Road up here. And you can see that Dr. John Call Bartlett owned the land here, Sewell Parkhurst owned this. So it mentions in the book that between John Call Bartlett and the Parkhurst, they owned all of Acton and High Street. And I meant it when that was said. They really did own most of the land. And you'll see a picture in there before the development started. It was actually after this lot, so it was subdivided, but before the majority of the development. And that was all their land. This is Edwin Parkhurst's station agent business card here. And you can see the hill has been stripped of trees for firewood and lumber. And there was a lone pine tree at the top for many, many years. I saw a picture. I couldn't find it, or I would have showed you, when the tree lost all its needles, and eventually it fell over. So there is a fire tower there that the state owns right now. Now, this is his side business. He says, please examine the other side of this card. So when you go there, what do you get? You get his pitch, real estate in Chelmsford Center, and he's talking about those same 5 lots. Okay, now some more homes. This is a view, this is after the development was done. This is the house here at the corner of Acton, and this is High Street. So this is the house that Eleanor Parkhurst lived in later in her life. This is the town hall. This is the Amos B. Adams farm, and it's on Fletcher Street. That's the house, the other mystery house that I told you I didn't know what it was in the front cover of the history book. So here again is the front cover of the history, the inside jacket of the history book. And there is the Amos B. Adams farm. So now you've got knowledge of what all of these buildings are all along here. There was another building that came in later, but it was after 1923. This picture actually is about 1923 based on the whistle up here. So we're going to talk about this building later. This is what the site looks like today at the corner of Fletcher and Chelmsford Streets. That's where the Amos B. Adams farm was. It's a Sunoco station today. This is Google Earth. Okay, now we're at Skyview Drive, and that's on Westford Street near the end of Dalton. And Skyview Drive goes right about through the middle of this barn. This was David C. Perham's dairy, and his grandson, his son was Edwin C. Perham. He ran the dairy after, and Edwin C. was delivering milk. So here he is with the, in this particular case, it's, can't quite read it. There were 2 names for the farm over the years, but that's Arnold C. Perham. Arnold C. Perham was a collector of history. He was a historian. He worked for the town for something like 67 years. He was a volunteer. Very active. He was a historic commission member, and guess what he was president of? Historical Society, right? Hey, we got a really smart guy here. So, and at 77 Westford Street, the house that just recently got moved back, this barn was actually located right behind the house. In the picture that's in the book, it's about 1898 or so. You can't see this barn because it was behind the house, but there it is. This is across the street, number 76 Westford Street. That house is still there. And this is the 1934 picture of that David C. Perham and then Edwin C. Perham. This was part of their farming operations. Now, David C. Perham was also a butcher. So one of these buildings may have been a slaughterhouse. This is what it looks like today. There's the Westford Street sign. There's the little oval at the end of Dalton Road. This is what the oval looks like from the end, and if you look at the rock here, it says Perham Corner. So you say, aha, now I know why it's called Perham Corner, because David C. Perham and Edwin C. Perham owned the house on this side of the road, 76, and they owned the house on this side of the road, 77. The one on 77 was actually rented. Another butcher rented it, and there's a picture of his wife and daughter in the new book. And if you look very carefully, there's a picture of the butcher himself. He became a fireman. Oh, but you have to go to the fire station history to see him. But he's in there. Now, this is Westford Street this way, and this is Dalton Road down this way. What happens if you go all the way to the other end of Dalton Road? There's another park, right? What's that park called? Perham Park. So both ends of Dalton Road, you got Perham Corner at this end, and you got Perham Park at the other end. Well, the park at the other end was actually given by Henry S. Perham, who was a cousin, and the relationship is explained in the new book. And this is Ted Emerson. We've been talking about Ted. Ted was actually Brad Emerson, who called me today, his father. And here he is as chairman of the selectmen, and he's giving a dedication to the monument right here for Perham Park. So this is what it looks like today. This is Chelmsford Street, and this is the other opposite end of Dalton Road. And there's a 52 millimeter anti-tank gun that was installed here after World War II. If anybody knows where that gun came from, anything about it, I've had some inquiries. People haven't been able to find out anything. So if you know, you can help us do the research. Contact through the Historic Society website. Now people. Okay, we're getting closer to Paul Dutton, okay? This is Caroline P. Dutton right here. And what does the P stand for? And who's her brother? Nope, S. Waldo. S. Waldo was George's great uncle. So this is her brother right here, on the right side of the cover. She married Dr. Charles Dutton. I don't know what the relationship is between Hildreth Dutton and Dr. Charles Dutton. I don't get paid enough to figure that out. But anyway, they had a son by the name of Paul Dutton. Okay, he's a pretty good-looking guy. And here's his picture right here. He's in the middle. And we don't know who Tucker was. This right here is Walter Perham. And Walter Perham is Henry S. Perham's son. Now, Henry S. Perham had an older sister by the name of Mary Elizabeth. And there's a little bit of sad story about her because in 1865, she married a man. This one. 1865, she married this guy right here. But she died in 1869, so presumably it was in childbirth. So then he married S. Waldo Parkhurst's sister here, and they had a son, Paul. And of course, everybody knows that Paul and his wife Emma were given the house next door as kind of a wedding present when they got married. That's the yellow house. And this is very relevant today, of course, because this summer, by June actually, it's going to be moved over to the intersection of North Road and Dalton Road. Anybody here not know that? Yeah, it's been in the papers. It's pretty big news in town. Anybody in the library, of course, knows. So, so now we go on with Walter Perham here. Here's Walter. Here's his wife, Grace Craigie. And here's Henry S. Perham. Henry always had these characteristic sideburns. But there's a bit of a sad story with this picture. And I'm guessing here, I don't have backup, but I'm pretty sure what I'm going to tell you. He was elected or appointed chairman of the 1905 Celebration Committee. And he did do his duty. In fact, here he's actually in a play. He ran the committee. It was a huge celebration. They published a book. They had a whole week's programs that are very well documented. Simon Toll took some great pictures. Arthur Emerson was around. And I think he knew he was sick at this time because he looks a little melancholy to me in some of the other pictures I've seen. So this winter, Walter and Henry S. Went to Florida, probably by train. And in February, Henry died of liver disease. Now, Henry ran a cider mill, and his father, David C. Perham, had a huge stock of hard cider in the basement of the Baptist church. So I'm wondering, I don't have anything to back this up, but I'm wondering if too much hard cider may have caused some liver disease. It's kind of sad because he was also writing the history book at the time, and Reverend Wilson Waters had to take it over. Mary and George Byam are in the book. There's a picture of their house and then houses. There's a picture of their family. This is a different picture of their family. Actually got contacted out of the blue by a guy in East Overshoe, Texas. I can't even remember the name of it. It's not even on Google Map. He said, don't even bother to look. He says, you'll never find it. But it's north of Rockwall. He's a direct descendant of George A. Byam. He's a genealogy buff. He sent me the family tree. Now, George and Mary were somehow related. So let's look at the family tree here. This is George in the yellow. This is Mary in the yellow, okay? Mary's grandfather, Amos Byam, and George's great-grandfather, Amos Byam, were the same person. Or another way to look at it, George's grandfather, Deacon Amos Byam, was Mary's father's uncle. So it took me quite a while to wrap my head around this, and I'm not sure I have it all fully screwed on, but I guess that makes them first cousins once removed. So the other thing I noted, and the only reason I'm giving you this eye chart, I thought it was kind of interesting. Back in the 1700s, you know how names go in cycles? Like when my wife and I were young, half my wife's friends are named Nancy. Well, if you look on here, almost half the women are named Lucy. I got Lucy Fletcher, Lucy Kidder, Lucy Blodgett, Lucy Adams, and Lucy Barrett. So you got a whole catalog of Chelmsford names, and they're all Lucy. And these are all from 1700 into the 1800s. Churches. Hey, we're going to make it.
When it was time to sign, for you to sign it.
Yes, so let's, I'll hustle right along here. This isn't too much further. In 1917, the church voted to get rid of these horse sheds, so you thought you might care where they went, or maybe not. This is the house at 39 Chelmsford Street. In back, I don't, if you can see it right here, this is where about half of the horse sheds went. They used it as a utility shed and a place to store things outdoors. So here you can see a better picture of the sheds. They had one closed space, and they probably put wagons, and it looks like a lot of junk. Here you can see the McFarland School, and these houses are on Wilson Street right here. So this is what the site looks like today. That's where the CVS is. So you can see the two houses on Wilson Street, McFarland School. Now this is Eben Adams and his wife Lottie and their two kids, Ralph and Arthur. Ralph grew up, became the first fire chief. He was actually fire chief of the Center Fire District. So if you go to the fire department history, you'll see him. The second fire chief, right after him, was his first cousin, Arnold C. Perham. I have to mention Arnold C. Perham one more time because he was a historian and a pack rat. During almost every year in the 1960s, he left something to the Historic Society. I was going through it the other night, and I couldn't believe all the amazing things that he had collected over the last century that the Historic Society already has. So you think, well, gee, that was nice of him to do that in the 60s. Well, last year, I get a call from his grandson, Arnold's son, Harold, who lived over in Hitching Post, did nothing with Arnold's archives, what was left, and it was some of his own treasured personal stuff. He kept it in the house or in the basement. I'm not sure exactly where it was. They gave it to the Historical Society this last year. So I got about 5 boxes and a major, major collection of Arnold C. Perham. And some of those items are, and some of the research enabled me to figure things out here that I never could have figured out without having, not only are there terrific pictures, they're all labeled. Unbelievable. Oh, I got pictures with maybe 30, 40 people on them. And actually, Eben Adams, he was a member of that family. You know, over at Maple, they call it Maple Farm on Maple Road. No, Red Wing Farm, sorry. Maple Farm is the name I was trying to think of for the Perham place, but Red Wing Farm, that family was related. James P. Emerson we talked about, he and his 3 brothers, they were all related. I've got pictures of the whole family gathering. In fact, a lot of them were taken at Red Wing Farm. They're all identified. So you'll be seeing some of those in the future. Anyway, the reason this is here, Eben ran a store across the street. That's the store in the Oddfellows Hall. This is when it was new. This wagon right here, take the back seat off, and 2 years later, you've got a pickup truck. Okay, that is the same wagon. And this is the pickup truck. He was one of the first grocers in town to actually deliver. Now, the reason they're in here in this location, this is where they lived on North Road. So if you look, some of you old timers may remember this building. It was the predecessor to the St. Mary's that's there today. And there's some pictures of the 2 churches together at the very last page of the book, the new book. This is the Our Lady of Fatima statue here, but this is the Adams house. This is the Adams barn. Now here's the Adams house again. no barn. Okay, so this must be a few years later. So the church didn't need the barn, but they used the house as a rectory. Now they want to build a church, and they want to build it over there where the house is. They're going to actually build it around this church. This church is going to stay active until the other church is finished. And you're going to see those two pictures with both churches at the same time. What do they do with the old house? Sell it to Ted Emerson and move it to Fletcher Street. So here's the other house that I was telling you about. And this actually was 1973, just before it was demolished. That is the Eben Adams and Lottie Adams house, moved across the road. And that's the address that's just off the picture in the book. Okay, this is what it looks like today. This is Parley's Meeting House Road project, and that's Brad Emerson's, it used to be Emerson Plaza, now I think it's Plaza One or something like that. Here at the Merriam Grotto, I mentioned that it was built by a group of volunteers, so I thought I'd show you a picture of what it actually looks like today. And full disclosure, Danielle, who designed this and did the concept for it, her dad and I worked together at Raytheon a few years back. So, thank you for attending. If anybody would like to step.